being here. If you all would indulge me for just a moment to kind of set the stage for why this matters and why the issues that we are here to talk about today are so critical and so important to communities all over this nation. You see, I was sworn in as a law enforcement officer on February 12th of 1984. This Saturday, it will mark 38 years. I had the honor of serving in every rank at the Orlando Police Department and being appointed as the chief of police. I spent 27 years as a law enforcement officer. And I've seen during that time the best and the worst of people. But I've seen ordinary citizens bravely come to the aid of their neighbors. I've seen elected officials rise to the occasion no matter how tough. And I've seen law enforcement officers walk through the fires of danger to protect the innocent. When I was appointed chief of police in Orlando, crime was at an all-time high. Our murder rate was the highest it had ever been. We saw robberies, shootings, rapes, gang activity. But as the chief of police, I launched an all-out war on violent crime and violent offenders. You see, we were guardians when we needed to be, and we were warriors when we needed to be. The number one priority, regardless of the challenges that we all face in all communities, the number one priority has to be the reduction of violent crime. And we also need to make sure that we keep crime guns out of the hands of people who should not have them in the first place: terrorists, habitual offenders, and the mentally ill. Sadly, today, we have 5 times the murder rate of countries like Germany and the UK. Last year in my home state of Florida, 1,290 people were murdered. And you know, sadly, I know that I do not stand alone as I share those statistics. Today, we stand with representatives of law enforcement, but let me be clear. Crime prevention must be a partnership between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. Everybody counts, but everybody is accountable. Fighting crime is also about intervention and preventing crime from happening in the first place. It's about investing in those social ills that cause decay in communities in the first place. It's about investing in our schools, investing in our youth today, so we won't have to invest in our prisons tomorrow. And we must get serious as a nation about addressing mental health, for example, and addressing drug addiction, for example. We cannot leave all of America's challenges on the backs of the men and women in law enforcement. And we must invest in our police departments. I remember pleading that case as a police chief every year. When we take the time to talk to communities throughout our nation, particularly those in high crime areas, you know what they tell us? Those communities say, we want to fund the police. Matter of fact, we want to see more police. In Congress, we spend a lot of time and energy on too many issues that simply don't matter. And many days we spend time vilifying each other, when there are some issues, and this is one of them, that we should all come together. When our communities are experiencing disturbing increases in violent crime, including violent crime against law enforcement, public safety is the foundation on which we build great communities. No great society can exist without public safety. And when our law enforcement officers are not safe, and I say that as a former law enforcement officer, when they do not have the resources that they need, how can we even begin to keep our families, our neighbors, and businesses safe around this country? I've attended more police officers' funerals than I want to talk about today. Matter of fact, my first floor speech as a member of Congress, my first floor speech, you dream about what will it be, but it was a tribute to the first person I promoted after being appointed Chief Sergeant Deborah Clayton. This wife and mother was gunned down by a murder suspect as she tried to apprehend him. He had already killed his pregnant girlfriend. He was a career criminal who should not have had a gun in the first place. We need legislation that supports safe communities. And I am co-sponsoring legislation to increase funding our law enforcement and legislation to help police departments in hiring more detectives and specialists, because due to lack of adequate resources, nearly half of America's murders go unsolved. Is anyone really opposed to getting more murderers off of our street? We're joined today by members of Congress and by representatives of America's law enforcement community. By working together as lawmakers, as law enforcement, as other members of this community, we can rise up. And I am confident we can meet this moment. It is my absolute pleasure at this time to introduce the Baltimore Police Commissioner, Michael Harrison.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. The violent crime situation in major cities across this country is dire. The homicide rate has steadily risen over the past few years. Gun violence is devastating our communities as shootings have become a daily occurrence in our nation's urban centers. Many MCC members are also seeing more and more juveniles carrying out these violent acts. The amount of violence directed at law enforcement officers has also increased significantly, as you just heard. And many of these attacks are brazen, cowardly, and they represent a complete disregard for police officers, the job they do, and the sanctity of life. My own police officer, Baltimore police officer Kiana Holly, was killed in December after being ambushed in her patrol car while serving her community. According to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, 12 other police officers lost their lives in January after being shot, and this must stop immediately. Local law enforcement officers continue to work tirelessly every day to keep their communities safe. Given the immense challenges we're facing, However, we need help from our leaders in Washington. So passing the Victim Act is a great place to start. The Victim Act will provide police departments with much needed resources and bolster the response to violent crime. More specifically, this legislation will help law enforcement address staffing shortages, enhance forensic and investigative capabilities, and provide services and support to victims of violent crime and their families. Resources alone, however, are not enough. The failure of other parts of the criminal justice system to hold violent offenders accountable has removed a critical deterrent. To fully address violent crime threat facing our communities, this shortcoming must be addressed. So on behalf of the Major City Chiefs Association, I'd like to thank Representative Demings and all of the other members of Congress who are here today. And we ask you to support this much needed bill to enhance law enforcement in our communities. Thank you. Next up, you're going to hear from Representative Josh Gothmeier of New Jersey.
That's the best I've ever heard anyone pronounce it.
I'm sorry.
Thanks. No, man, that's really good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to start by thanking Val Demings for her courage, her leadership, her years of service, not just here, but in Florida, and all she did to protect our communities. Thank you so much, Val. And all the members who are with us today, thank you for your leadership. We're here to talk about critical investments, as Val said, that we need to make in law enforcement. As we see a rise in crime across the country, it's vital that we take steps to invest, not to fund. That we invest in law enforcement so we can help communities and keep our officers safe. That's why I recently introduced the new bipartisan bill, the Invest to Protect Act, with 26 Democrats and nearly 20 Republicans to make critical targeted investments in local police departments and our communities. This bill will help ensure that police officers in smaller communities, both across my home state of New Jersey, but all around the country, have the resources and training they need to keep themselves and families around the country safe. This bipartisan bill that I'm leading with Republican co-sponsor and former Sheriff Congressman John Rutherford has the support of many members, including Val Demings, will invest in officer safety, de-escalation, and domestic violence response training. It will allocate resources for body-worn cameras and cloud storage, and provide grants for small departments to recruit new officers and retention bonuses to help departments keep their existing officers. The legislation will provide investments also for officers pursuing graduate degrees in public health, and provide critical resources for departments to provide mental health resources for their officers. This bill is endorsed by many of the groups standing here today, including the Fraternal Order of Police, NAPO, National Organization of Black Enforcement Executives, the PBA, and more. Let me reiterate. Cutting to the bone only weakens any profession. It pushes good people out. It diminishes the overall quality and fuels a race to the bottom. It's especially true in law enforcement. The mayor of New York City, Mayor Adams, I think, said it so well. You cannot, and he does not believe, and I'm paraphrasing him, you can both have justice and public safety. You can have both. It doesn't have to be a choice. The only way to make our departments better and our communities safer is to invest wisely in training and tools, in recruiting and retention, and ensuring that they can all be involved in our communities so that we have safer communities. That's how you keep families safe. You need to invest to protect. Our bipartisan solution for police reform will make our nation safer. There are lots of good ideas. We should embrace them all and work together. As Democrats and Republicans here in the greatest country in the world, I know our best days will always be ahead of us. And now, is it okay if I introduce the next person? I want to introduce Patrick Jones, who's the president of the Fraternal Order of Police, who does a phenomenal job. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Representative Deming, I want to thank you for this invitation on behalf of the 364,000 members of the Fraternal Order of Police. But also thank you for all that you're doing here on Capitol Hill. She's been a FOP member for many years and working street cop and has a knowledge. She brings a knowledge to Congress that is so valuable to our profession. Her experience and background in addressing the nation's skyrocketing crime rate, she knows how to protect the community because she's done it, and she's been worked the beat and worked every position all the way up to chief. Ms. Deming knows that violent crime, homicides, shootings are the deepest wounds in our communities. And those who need the support the most are the ones that are crying out for it. My friends, this is not a political issue. This is a people issue. and one that we need to get right because the outcome is so vitally important to so many people. The Victim Act will give resources to agencies across this country in order to be able to address that violent crime and the trend we see across this country that so desperately needs to change. It makes our communities and it makes the job of being a law enforcement officer so much more, make it safer. So, Ms. Deming, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you to all of you that are part of this act, and we're proud to support it. And we're so proud to support this act, and also you as you give voice to law enforcement officers across this country. I would now like to introduce Representative Robin Kelly of Illinois.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you've heard already today, violent crime is on the rise across the country. My district in Illinois, which includes South Chicago and Chicago's south suburbs, is no exception. Gun violence especially has risen sharply in the past 2 years. Although we're seeing the spike in crime, the percentages of cases solved by law enforcement agencies is falling, and definitely true in Chicago. Our local police departments and locality leaders are doing everything they can to keep our communities safe and catch criminals, but it isn't enough. We need national action to help prevent crime in cities and towns across the country. That's why I'm an original co-sponsor of Rep. Demings' Victim Act. This legislation, as you've heard, will help localities by establishing a Department of Justice grant program to hire and retain detectives and victim services personnel to investigate shootings and support victims. Solving crimes and bringing justice to victims and their families makes our streets safer, and it also will improve relationships between communities and the police who serve them, which, again, I know all too well, representing the Chicagoland area. We need to pass this legislation quickly to take offenders off the streets, to provide mental health and other support services for victims, and to make our city safer for everyone. There's many pieces of legislation that we have been trying to get passed to make our streets safer, to support the police department, to take guns off the street, to make sure our police are trained and can improve police-community relations. I want to thank my friend and colleague Val Demings for her tireless work to improve safety and reduce crime. I am proud to stand with you today in support of this bill. Now I would like to introduce Dwayne Crawford from the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Carl. I'm here good to have the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives Noble. Also on behalf of our National President, Frederick Thomas, as well as our Regional Vice President, Stella Thomas, who could not be here. We definitely stand in solidarity with Congresswoman Val Demings. I also want to acknowledge our Chapter President, Wes Thomas, who represents Washington, D.C. area. But we are just as concerned as the rest of the nation is on the rise in violent crime. I would also say to you that I also bring heartfelt prayers and condolences to the victims of that crime. And unfortunately, men and women have lost their life in the line of duty and try to protect and serve our country. Our support for the Victims Act really focuses on a couple of things. The biggest one being, though, the issue of clearance rates. Our interest is in how can we improve the probability of closing these homicide cases. And so we thank you, Congressman, for all you've done. He's a member of NOBLE, but I'm going to say this about Congresswoman Demings. She said it before. She's one of the rare persons in her position that's actually gone up the entire ladder of our law enforcement community. She said earlier, and we're proud of all that you're doing. And I also want to say that we stand in solidarity with people that stand behind me, and for the media, whatever you can do to express to your viewing and listening audience, this is an American issue, not a Republican issue, not a Democratic issue, and it's a people issue. We need all of our communities to support your law enforcement community. We need all of our elected officials to put America first and say what? Collectively, we've got to find solutions of how to address this issue of violent crime. I'm now going to bring up Representative Dwight Evans from Pennsylvania.
Good afternoon. This is absolutely a pleasure to be standing with Val Demings, who has demonstrated so much leadership, not just in the great state of Florida, but in this nation. And it's very appropriate that she's leading on this issue in terms of the Victims Act. So I thank you, Val, for your leadership. The nation has increased in gun violence that began in 2020 and has created double pandemic for the people I represent. The House passed 2 bills that will help the bipartisan background check and the Charleston loophole. But in Philadelphia, the police are working more with boots on the ground and more officers in closing shooting cases. But our police commissioner, this is what she said: these efforts are all putting the same diminishing pool of resources. It's plainly stealing from Peter to play Paul. So the strong support for the Victims Act is something we desperately need. As someone who has pushed to help Val Demings and the victims of gun violence, I'm very pleased that this bill would provide victims and family members with mental health resources and help with shelter, wage, and relocation costs. The bill will do 3 things we should all agree on. Number 1, solve more fatal shootings and non-fatal shootings. Number 2, getting more shooters off the streets. Number 3, getting more help for victims with closure of these dreadful crimes. This is common sense. I say to Val, because you're the only one who has it and most appropriate to meet this moment. And I don't just say that lightly for someone who's actually been out there in the forefront. I have the pleasure of introducing someone who's the Director of Government Affairs for the National Association of Police. So Andy, it's for you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Representative Demings, for the invitation to speak today on behalf of the National Association of Police Organizations and the over 241,000 rank and file officers we represent across the country. Over the past 2 years, homicide rates have jumped nearly 40%. Police departments across the country are fighting to contain this increase in violent crime, but they are understaffed, under-resourced, and struggling to hire and retain good, qualified officers. The Victim Act will help address this issue by supplying much-needed grant funding to agencies to fill, replenish, and train their homicide and detective forces. This will enable law enforcement to focus on solving these violent crimes and bring justice to the victims and their families. But small police departments in particular are in desperate need of support and resources, which is why we also support the Invest to Protect Act introduced by Congressman Gottheimer. This bill will ensure that small and rural departments and their officers have access to the support and resources necessary to serve and protect their communities safely and effectively. And as we focus on responding to and preventing violent crime, we must ensure that any strategy includes deterring violence against our nation's law enforcement officers. Congress needs to act to make it a federal crime to violently attack a state and local law enforcement officer and ensure the safety of our officers as they work to keep our communities safe. Again, I want to thank Representatives Demings and Gottheimers and all the representatives standing here with us for their leadership and commitment to supporting law enforcement and the work our officers do. Thank you. And I would like to introduce Representative Espelette of New York.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm happy and proud to be standing next to Val Demings in this very important Victims Act that will help push back against the gun violence epidemic gripping the nation. This past couple of weeks, I saw a young woman in my district working in a Burger King get held up at gunpoint. She gave all the cash in the cash register to the perpetrator, and before he left the premises, he turned back and shot her dead. 19 years old. She had complained to her mother that she wanted to change her shift. She was working the midnight shift because it was very dangerous. Then I saw an 11-month-old baby in the Bronx part of my district, as she stayed with her mother in the car, get shot in the face. Mayor Adams and I walked the streets of that neighborhood, and little did we know that that same evening we will again meet at Harlem Hospital to join the families of police officers Rivera and Mora that were shot and killed in Harlem. This is all within 1 week. and the common denominator is illegal, deadly weapons, guns. So the president visited New York City to show support, and I'm here to show support for the Victims Act and Val Demings, who has been leading the way. Ghost guns, unfortunately, are the weapons of the future. In fact, New York City in November of 2021 had found the police officers had recuperated over 200 ghost guns. There was an incident in my district where someone shot 4 people outside of a nightclub with a ghost gun, untraceable, no serial number. They're assembled at home. They circumvent background checks. And so that's part of this package as well. How do we contain the epidemic of gun violence across America? How do we protect the people that we swore right here to protect and uphold the Constitution of the United States? So I'm happy and proud to be here with my colleagues and Representative Val Demings, who has been a leading voice, and who better than someone that rose from the ranks to be now a voice in Congress for families across America. And so I'm here, and we will continue. This fight is a fight for the families of our country that deserve to have public safety, that deserve to walk the streets of their neighborhoods in peace and safety. And we will continue to push until we get this done. Thank you so much. And with that, I will present Jim Burch, the president of the National Police Foundation.
Good morning. Jim Burch, National Police Foundation president. The National Police Foundation is a nonpartisan and independent organization dedicated to advancing policing through science and innovation. We're pleased to be here today with so many others from Congress and colleagues that we work with in the law enforcement community, and so pleased to be a part of the great work that's being led by Representative Demings and so many others. We're most excited and eager to be a part of this and to support this bill because of all of the things that it will make available to America's law enforcement community, and they are many. But above and beyond all of that, this bill delivers 3 things that you've heard others say here today that I want to make sure you take away from this. This bill delivers safety, this bill delivers justice, and this bill delivers accountability. That's what our communities want, that's what our communities need, and that's what we intend to deliver with the support, the very strategic support provided by this bill. This bill addresses the needs of crime victims who are so deserving of a better hand, so deserving of our support, our care, and our attention immediately when and where needed. This bill delivers vital support for those in law enforcement agencies who are tasked with addressing some of the most complex, difficult cases and bringing closure to those cases rapidly. Not only to provide justice to the crime victims, but to prevent further violence and further carnage. There can be no more important resources made available for the law enforcement community, and that's the reason why we wholeheartedly support the Victim Act. Now I want to turn it back over to, I think, probably the greatest champion of law enforcement. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Demings, I misspoke.
Don't let me overdo it.
And I apologize, but the information is not here on who I'm introducing, so thank you. Appreciate that.
At this time, we're going to turn it over to my classmate, Representative Tom O'Halloran from Arizona.
Well, thank you, Val. You're a friend, you're a leader, and you're someone that has a voice that cares about the people of America and our police officers. I want to thank Jim for his remarks and all the other speakers. As a former law enforcement officer in the city of Chicago, I firmly believe that we must ensure that those that have sworn to protect and serve have the resources they need while also being held to the highest standards. And most of them today, a vast, vast majority, do just that. Because when we invest in training and hiring and support of our officers, we invest in the community and the safety of those within our communities. That's why I joined Val Demings and a bipartisan group of legislators to help introduce the Victims Act. Thank you for your leadership, Val. Though targeted funding increases for our hardworking local and tribal police departments, this bill will help to hire, train, and keep good detectives and victim service workers to better provide the needed resources to catch criminals. I did that for a while. As a young officer, I got on the police department when I was 20 years old and soon became a homicide detective in the city of Chicago. I've seen what happens to victims. I've seen what happens to their families. Their families I lived with for years while the case moved on. And the trauma of that. And the trauma of the good friends that I lost. Just within our unit alone, over a few short years, we lost 4 officers. Friends of mine, partners of mine. That's a tragedy. And we're seeing more and more of that today. That has just got to stop. Their families are important too. I remember my wife and my son especially, after I didn't show up at home one night. My son from that point on never went to bed until I got home, and I usually work 6 at night till 2 in the morning. The trauma on officers' families is tremendous. They need the resources, and they need these resources. But this Congress or future Congresses can't forget that those resources can't just stop 3 years from now. They have to keep coming. If we're going to create real change, it has to be change that's meant for the long term, for both officers, victims, and those neighborhoods where this is occurring. That's why I'm making sure our legislation will help bring closure to families and justice to the courtroom supporting hardworking officers along the way. And with that, I'm turning it back over to my friend, a fellow woman in blue, Val Demings.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, I just want to thank all of the speakers here today. I don't think that this nation can face any problem that we cannot solve when we work together. And what you see here today is an effort to work together to address violent crime, to address the issue of solving homicide cases. You know, the first thing I think that law enforcement tries to do is to prevent the crime from happening in the first place. We need the community's help to do that. But then, sadly, if a homicide or murder does occur, then solving that homicide brings such closure to the families, which they so desperately deserve. I want to thank my colleagues in the House of Representatives. I want to thank every speaker who joined us today, and I'm sure if we have time, we would entertain any questions from, you see they barely nodded their head on that. Any questions that any of you may have. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. You talk about trying to help the police in this instance here. You're running for the Senate. Mr. O'Halloran represents what's been a battleground district. Is there concern when some in your party continue to talk about defunding the police? I know that Whip Durbin knocked that down yesterday, so did Steny Hoyer, but that continues to be a narrative. What is that a schism inside the Democratic Party, especially when you're talking about these issues here?
Well, let me say this. Mr. O'Halloran is a former law enforcement officer. He's a grown man, and he can certainly speak for himself. And I served 27 years in every rank. I'm pretty grown too, and I can certainly speak for myself. I said it in my remarks. Look, they can think whatever they want to think, but I want you to listen to me. when we talk to communities out there, a lot of times we try to speak for communities, but good legislators.
We're not getting you on microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good legislators talk to communities about things that matter to them. When we talk to communities, particularly those in some of the most high crime areas, they will say, no, we don't want to defund the police. We want to fund the police. We don't want to see less police. We want to see more police, because they believe if we cut police resources, then they become even more vulnerable. So I'm going to continue to use my voice as a member representing Florida. I know Representative O'Halloran and every member here will continue to utilize their voice. We need to make sure that police departments have the resources that they need to be able to effectively do the job. Next question. Yes, yes, sir.
But Congresswoman, when you look at, you just discussed the narrative that existed for a while and the push by some colleagues on Capitol Hill to support that defund effort, how much damage do you think has been done by the defund the police effort?
Let me just say this. I also have a colleague. And look, we're still dealing with the effects of January 6th, right? I also have a colleague who said, if you didn't know better, you would think that was just another tourist day. How much effect do you think that? I don't think anybody who saw what happened and heard what happens believe that that was just another tourist day. We've got to stay very focused. Yes. And see, I think what gets us off, well, not me, because I'm very focused on addressing violent crime, but too many members and too many people allow themselves to be distracted and get off the agenda where they should be laser focused. I have colleagues who say a lot of things every day, but we need to stay focused and make sure law enforcement departments have the resources that they need. Over here. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm not a former law enforcement agent, but also the other thing I would say to the media, you know, you're talking about what a few people think, but if you take a survey among the Democratic Congress members, most people are not saying defund the police. So I hope you guys don't make it a bigger issue than it is.
Well said, Robin. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Now, actually, what a lot of people are talking on the ground is that we're hearing from a lot of these funerals of slain officers as well as other victims, their families are saying, wait, these DAs are not prosecuting these perps, and they're just not following through with these arrests. They're being soft on crime here. Why is it that we're not hearing more from Democrats on Capitol Hill about this? They're saying, oh, well, that's just a local issue. We can't do more about it. What about cashless bail? Why is it that we're not hearing more about going against these policies that, say, Mayor Eric Adams wants to deal with? Why is it that we're not hearing more about this from you guys? And it seems like you guys are just sort of throwing money at the problem more than anything else.
Well, let me say this. The Victims Act is about more than throwing money to a problem. As I indicated, over half of the murders that occur in this nation go unsolved. And if we want to reduce the crime rate, then we've got to identify those perpetrators and put them in jail. And so let me say this. I don't think you've heard anybody here suggest that we should be soft on crime. But as I said in my opening remarks, it is a process, right? It starts with crime prevention. What we want to do is to prevent crime from happening in the first place. And certainly, when officers are able to do the investigations, make those arrests, they want those persons to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. So thank you for your suggestion that we need to use our voice more. I'm going to start that today. When officers use their resources, do those investigations, and make those arrests, they want to see those persons be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Anybody else want to address that in any way? Commissioner, anything you want to add to that?
Thank you. I think you said it very well. Police are doing the job every day. You hear about the arrests we make.
But this is about the DAs, though. Should the DAs actually be prosecuting these criminals now? police are doing their jobs, but it seems like the DAs aren't following through.
Well, you know what? What I'm hearing you say is that we might need to have a round table or bring some DAs in and talk to them about that final piece of the process. Because when people commit murders, when people commit violent crime in particular, I want those bad people to go to jail and be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. So thank you for your question. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. We actually are out of time. I'm sorry.
It's a really quick question about leadership, pretty much. So,
go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to know, are you working with leadership to get this bill to the floor? How are you gaining momentum to get it to the floor? And
it's
how
a
much
bipartisan, because you've heard, I think every speaker here today talked about, what we're talking about today is not a partisan issue. You know, when I worked at the police department, I could not tell you the political party of the overwhelming majority of the men and women. We had a mission, and we were laser focused on accomplishing that mission. This bill has bipartisan support, and you better believe we're going to work with leadership and everybody that we can to get this bill introduced and signed into law. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
You have a great day, everyone. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll see you invite. Well done. See Mark. Let me look at. Well done. This was about. Good invite. Just email me about like when it works for you. Anytime. You travel safe. Take care. Old friend. I'll see you more. Yeah, no worries. Next time.